can't remember the answer to.
There's Metallica.
That's
you got
can't remember the answer.
James Hetfield, Kirk Hammett, Rob Trujillo, and Lars Ulrich. Thank you, guys.
All right, then.
Okay, so who's got a question? Please. Oh, come on. We spent $20,000 here. Who's got a question? Go ahead. You got to go to the mic.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I don't know whether it's afternoon or evening. What time is it out there?
It's noon.
What time is it?
5 after
noon,
12.
I believe, the next day, right?
All right. Question. How did you decide, this will be for anybody that, in the band that wishes to answer it, how did you decide on entering into a documentary with Sanofsky, etc.?
Well, I feel that we had known their previous documentary work with Brothers Keeper and Paradise Lost. The idea was to do some kind of infomercial advertising our new album and the making of the record, and then some pretty huge things in our lives started happening, and they were captured on film, and we continued to just keep filming, and it started happening as natural, I think, as the record did, and the project became more and more important, I think, is especially the inner stuff that we were starting to discover about ourselves. So I'm really glad that moment in our careers is, and as people, is captured on film.
How did you go about securing the services of Mr. Tall for this sort of therapeutic infusion?
Peter and Cliff, our managers at Q Prime in New York, had worked with one of the other bands that they managed, had been working with him, and they had a relationship. In January of 2001, when we sat down in San Francisco with Jason Newsted, when it was pretty evident that he was going to tell us at this meeting that he was had enough and that he was leaving Metallica, it was suggested to us by Peter and Cliff that that Phil come and maybe deal with whatever would happen that afternoon, and he did, and we really connected with him, and we sort of wanted to continue that process. I mean, obviously, at the time when we started with him, we had no idea what the next year of our lives would look like, but there was definitely a connection with him at that first meeting, and it just continued.
Lars, you're known for this Napster issue, and in the film, there's a cartoon where it says, "Napster bad, money good." Would you comment on your thoughts about that part of the film?
It's not particularly easy to watch for me. It was a difficult time in my life. It was an odd 3 months, one that I still am not really quite sure happened. Still think it might all just have been a bad dream. But, you know, that cartoon was fine. I mean, we've taken the good with the bad on that, and, you know, it's part of those couple of years, and will forever, for better or worse, be part of the Metallica legacy. And we feel that we collectively have certainly passed that, and I somehow ended up being the poster child for this whole thing, and it's still a bit of a mind fuck to really deal with, but it's part of those couple years, so it's in the film. It's one of the areas in the film where I squirm a little more in my seat than others.
I think you look good in cartoon.
Okay, thank you. I want to relinquish to
Okay.
someone.
Any other questions here?
Yeah, I have one for the band and one for Rob. For the band, in one part of the film when James was riding around in his hot rod, he made a comment about something about this is what it's like, this is being famous. When you're fans and it seems like you have a very intense relationship with your fans, you're going to be famous on a whole nother level. They're going to know you in a whole different way than they know you now. I'm wondering how you think that's going to change your relationship with your fans when they see that you're vulnerable and you have all these different issues going on. And then for Rob, I was wondering what it was like the first time you stepped on stage in front of an audience as a member of Metallica. I mean, how did you sleep before and after that gig?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, for me, connecting with people has never been easy for me, and now I realize that the more I do, the more they know the real me, so the easier it is to be me. And I think the more that people know about me and my struggles, the easier it will be to connect with people. I've put myself out there, and if they choose to, stomp on my heart or to embrace it, that is up to them. But I have done my part in letting people know how I am and what weaknesses and what struggles I have.
I also feel that this film shows a part of Metallica that's just really just intimate and honest, and it shows a part of the band that you don't really see a lot with other public bands. I mean, this is a window into our private life and how we interact, and it's all just very natural and honest. And what the people will see when they see this film is basically how we really are off stage, out of the studio, in the studio, whatever. It shows a real human side of Metallica that isn't really brought to light.
As far as the question you asked for me, I tell you, from the moment I joined Metallica, it just got really intense. The hardest working band ever, for sure. My first gig was at San Quentin State Penitentiary with no rehearsals. My second gig the following day was MTV Icon, which was for millions of viewers all around the world, playing a Metallica medley of classics that we maybe rehearsed 20 minutes, 15 minutes. My third gig was in front of 60,000 people, football stadium or somewhere, soccer stadium in Europe. So I tell you, it's pretty intense. For me, I'm more like the boy in the bubble. I've got blinders on and I'm just moving straight forward and hitting as hard as I can.
You just mentioned during the time that the film was being made, you were going through a personal transformation, but also during that time there were significant world transformations going on, mainly 9/11, the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, which were not even discussed in the film. And I wanted to know, was that a conscious decision not to get into bigger issues, or were those just issues that you weren't dealing with at the time?
I feel we were dealing with them in our own ways. There was some material written that kind of hinted at it as well that didn't make it onto St. Anger. But I vividly remember that morning. I had come out of rehab and was struggling with reintroducing myself to the outside world, coming out of that cocoon. And I remember that morning talking to my sponsor and telling him about what struggles I was going through that morning, and he said, "James, you know what's going on in the world right now? Some airplanes have gone into the World Trade Center," and instantly my little problems went away. And so in a way, I think some of that stuff helped us, forget about our selfish struggles in a way, and it became more global in a way. So I think it helped me at least.
But I can just say that there was no conscious decision made to omit any of that stuff from the film. I mean, in some way there were some, I think, interesting correlations, and like James was just talking about, the morning of September 11th was the first day that we were supposed to get back together again and meet up with James after he went away for 3 or 4 months. And so James called up the night before to me and said that he wasn't coming, and then he didn't feel that he was ready to see the rest of the band yet and to meet and to talk. And so me and Kirk and Bob Rock and Phil were sitting in a hotel room the next day dealing with our own internal little minute fucking horse shit, while over on the TV over in the corner, fucking all that stuff was going down, and it was surreal. But there were no conscious efforts to sort of keep any events or anything out of the timeline of the film. It just became, you got to remember that Joe and Bruce shot 1,200 hours of film for this project, and you've seen 2 hours and 10 minutes. So there's quite a bit of it left somewhere on a cutting floor or being prepared for the 14 DVDs that are coming out at some point in the next few years.
I just have to say that, commenting on September 11th, that day, for me, it personally felt like it was the end of the world. It felt like the world was falling apart around me, and my inner world was falling apart around me, and it was a pretty scary time. And yeah, it's just it was really a really difficult day to get through for all of us, I feel, on all our different levels.
Hey guys, I'm Ryan Downey with MTV News.
Hello.
Nice to see you. My question comes as more of a fan whose life was forever changed by the new wave of British heavy metal and the California and Bay Area thrash metal movements. I have to say that one of the most exciting things from a fan perspective for me is kind of the meeting with Dave Mustaine. Long overdue, I suppose. And if, Lars, you could maybe talk to me a little bit about the emotions that were going through you at that point and kind of how that meeting came together, and James, maybe your thoughts on that also.
Yeah, what happened basically was that as through the spring of 2001, as we were getting deeper into our issues and starting to resolve some of the things between the members in the band, and really going back through the 20 years of Metallica and so on, that we realized that there were some issues with Dave Mustaine that were really unresolved and really left hanging out there. I had, over the course of the last couple of years, actually had a fairly good relationship going with Dave on the phone and so on, and I called him one day and said, look, I think it would be really great for us, and hopefully for you, maybe we could all get together and try and resolve some of that bullshit from way back in the day. Then what happened was James went away, and so it was sort of left hanging. But Dave came up to the Bay Area to play a concert, which was actually 2 days after 9/11. So there was still that very weird energy, and everything was just, it was an awkward couple of days. But Dave decided to go ahead with the concert, and we met up to basically talk with Phil and to try and just see if we could find some resolution and resolve from the past. And Dave was asked if he was okay if Joe and Bruce filmed that, and he was fine with that. So it was a very powerful couple hours for me to be able to connect with Dave and hear his side of some things that had never been talked about. And it was difficult for me to understand that, when he thought back on the last 20 years of his life, that, with all the success that Megadeth had and all the, critical respect and so on, that there was that completely became secondary to this whole thing about how Metallica sort of had dominated his life for the better part of the last 20 years. So for me, it was a very powerful experience to be part of that, and it seems that a lot of people who have seen this film really pick up on that sequence as being very, very powerful and incredibly just a whole nother level of vulnerability.
Yeah. My perception of that meeting, is I watched it like everyone else did. I wasn't there, and it was good. I'm glad Dave stepped up and wanted to do something like that. It must have been pretty difficult for him, and it just he must have had a million things on his mind to talk about, but for him to actually focus and be real about what he was saying and not, get caught up in resentment or rage or some of the other stuff, it's a good insight to see what resentments, what struggles, what difficulty he's gone through in his life, and really being able to see all of the what ifs that he still carries around, and it's possible that Jason might still struggle with some of that too, kind of being on the outside of Metallica now, and I could still never feel exactly how Dave feels. I can be as open as I can to it, but I see how easy it would be for him to struggle and to look for ways to feel better. And I'm glad that it happened, and I hope he sees the therapeutic value in all of that as well.
I'm wondering, with watching everything that you've gone through, kind of through a screen, and just looking back on everything, if you guys have maybe reevaluated the way you look at Napster and maybe even apologized to Sean Fanning for any of that.
Apologize.
It's Sean for you.
I haven't seen Sean Fanning since the MTV Awards back in the day there 3 years ago. So his phone was busy every time I tried to call him. But, like I said before, it's kind of part of the past as far as I'm concerned. I'm very proud of the fact that we stood up for what we believed and believe in. Metallica has always, I think, we've been very, sort of protective of ourselves and Metallica, and whenever anybody fucked with our shit, we sort of stood up for that and tried to protect it. And at the time, you gotta understand sort of what it was that happened with this whole thing, with all of a sudden, like, this song that we were still working on in the studio was being played on like 30 radio stations across America. It was like, how did that come about? A company called Napster, okay? Well, let's go and fuck with them back. And then it sort of went from there. So I'm very proud of the fact that, 18, 19 years into Metallica, we still continue to stand up for the principles that we always believed in. I would like to say that at least for myself, we were somewhat blindsided about what we got into, but to me, that's always been the purity of this band, and I think that people have a tendency to kind of forget about that a little bit, that when you become very successful and you sell lots of records and all this type of stuff, that everything you do ends up being the result of behind the closed doors meetings and all this stuff with marketing people and managers and lawyers and advisors and whatever the fuck. And it was literally like, the whole thing went down in 15 seconds on a phone call. It's like, huh? I Disappear's being played on the radio? What the fuck is that? It's a company called Napster. Let's put an end to that. And then we sort of just jumped. like we always do. And I think Metallica has always just jumped. And we've never been too fucking concerned about where we landed. Most of the time we've landed in a somewhat safe place. And this one got a little rockier. But I'm proud of always sticking true to those principles that we feel that this band has kind of stood for. And look, you know, I got an iPod, you know, I subscribe to iTunes. I mean, it's never really about downloading to me. That was the big myth. It was about control. It was about control, and that control got taken away from us. And if there's one thing that we are, and I'll be glad to stand up and say, is we're definitely control freaks, and we like to control, and we like to protect what's Metallica. And so, I don't have any problems with any of the downloading stuff out there, and it is what it is, and I don't particularly have much to say about it these days.
Let's see, as far as being apologetic about the whole situation, I still feel that we still stand where we've always stood on this issue, and I don't feel that there's any need to be apologetic on any of the stands we've taken on Napster and that whole issue. I mean, we still feel the same way now that we felt 2 years ago. I mean, nothing has really changed. It's just that we've moved on, from the whole Napster front, and now it's, in other people's hands, and we've just gone on and gone to other pastures, really.
Next question.
Hi, you guys. It's Claire Varney here from Channel V.
Hi.
And I was lucky enough, hey, woo, you're out in our country right now. And I was lucky enough to come up to your studio in Sausalito. I think, was it 1999, just before S&M, the live album was being recorded.
Yeah,
that
was
interviews, and it was just such a great time.
That was the plant in Sausalito.
Right, exactly. And it was such an amazing time for y'all because it just was starting up. I mean, that thing it was just such a success. Tell us about our audience about how soon after that was this movie shot, set us up with the movie, and are you proud of what the outcome of this film is? It's different from what I saw that day when I interviewed you all, and what our audience has seen of you all.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, if you want a kind of a timeline, like James was hinting at before, our relationship with Joe and Bruce goes back to the Paradise Lost days where we gave Metallica music to those two films. We became good friends with him, close, mutual respectful relationship. We talked about some various projects, one of them being this kind of history thing of Metallica that was sort of thrown out there but never really materialized much into anything. After the Summer Sanitarium, the first Summer Sanitarium tour in 2000, it was clear that there were some shit that started brewing kind of in the band and within some of the stuff that was Jason. And it after we came back from that tour, things were a little rocky, and nothing much was really dealt with for the rest of 2000. And then Jason called a meeting, I think in November or something. He didn't want to call the meeting before Christmas, and we was told to us he didn't want to spoil anybody's Christmas. Gee, I wonder what the meeting's going to be about. So the first week of January 2001, this famous meeting, and at that time, Joe and Bruce were still kind of hovering on the horizon about sort of doing a project. It was sort of just kind of floating out there. It hadn't really taken any kind of shape. And I would like to say that the project never really took any kind of shape until we got further into it and realized that there actually was potentially a film in it. But very soon after Jason left in January 2001, Joe and Bruce started coming out to the Bay Area because I think we all felt that it was an interesting time for the band. It was an unusual time for the band, and it seemed like whatever the fuck it was that was going on potentially could be captured into something that felt unique and felt like it was sitting in a different place than maybe some other stuff that was good. This is still, sort of a year before the Osbournes and so on. It just felt like there was something going on that maybe these guys could do something with. It really was that loose. And Joe and Bruce came out and started filming, I think, maybe about 6 weeks after Jason left, late February, early March of 2001. And then it just kept going. And it just kept going. And it just kept going. And as all these things in our lives unfolded, they just kept filming away. And at some point, somebody somewhere said, maybe there's a movie in there. It was probably either Joe or Bruce. And you've just seen that in the last couple of days. And I think you asked if we were proud. I'm so fucking proud of this film. And I'm so happy about the way that it's being received and that people feel, a lot of what people are saying that we get back is people feel closer to us. And since we feel closer to each other, and we feel closer to the people around us as a result of all the great work we did with Phil and all the great work we did with Bob and all the great work we did with each other, we're so proud to have the opportunity to share this with other people. And we had one screening. Most of the people that have seen this film have been more industry people or film people or whatever, but there was one screening from members of our fan club where about 50 of them saw the film, and the feedback from that, from the true fans, was just so beautiful, because it all talked sort of universally about how they felt closer to us, and how one guy said something to the effect of that now that we had been working on being better people, he was going to go work on being a better person himself and be a better fan of Metallica, and I thought that was beautiful.
I'm very proud of the film also, but there's still a part of me that giving away the mystique, or yes, getting closer to people now that we've put out there a lot of our innermost fears and things. A big fear of intimacy, and now that I still struggle with that every day, but I know it's good for me, and it has potential to help other bands. It has potential to help other people to just blow away that mystique of the rock idol, or all of the perfect life that supposedly we're supposed to lead.
So you can be vulnerable and intimate, and you can still rock, right?
Basically, yeah.
No doubt.
David? Okay, thanks, guys. I feel as if I've just witnessed the sequel to a movie that hasn't been released yet. Do you guys still believe in therapy? And is it something, based on what you just said about getting close to each other again, that you'd recommend to other bands?
Absolutely. In fact, the Beatles would have probably still been together if they would have taken the same approach we would have taken. I don't know, we might have had some great bands still together and with us now if they would have taken our approach. But, hopefully this can be a guideline to, other bands. I mean, like James is saying, maybe there are bands out there who are experiencing the same things that we did, and maybe this movie will give them some sort of direction and help them. And, I hope that does happen, because being in a band can be really, really, really great, but it can also be very, very difficult and challenging to a person and the people around the band. And so hopefully, some people get some insight toward how they can, apply what we went through to their own problems and challenges, and maybe come out of it, with some sort of positive direction.
I think there's a lot of newer bands that already embrace that style of communication, and maybe we're somewhat of a product of the 80s, kind of, a little bit closed in or selfish like, and maybe we're just now rediscovering how it is to be open with each other, to be friends with each other. So for us it's fairly cathartic, and for others it might just be that's how it is in life. but I really recognize that bands these days are taking care of themselves, not only physically, but mentally. And, I feel that therapy is a safe place for people who don't know how to communicate. That's really what it is. But I think a lot of bands and people growing up nowadays have a lot easier time communicating.
James, making documentary films is a rather precarious endeavor financially. Did the band chip in to help make this film financially?
Yeah, we chipped in
Everything.
everything we had. Yes. Well, we never knew what this was going to be. It was a making of record, and then it grew and grew and grew. And the more film we were using, the more expensive it got, and it became a little more scary. And the more we had to really believe in what we were doing and making sure that it was from the heart and it was the right thing to do. Because a lot of Metallica's life savings were going into that, and we know we made the right decision.
Actually, that was a prerequisite for me joining the band. The band said, Robert, you've got to finance this documentary. You got to take all that money out of your savings and pay for this.
Thanks, buddy.
Any more questions?
I have a question.
I have a question for you.
Is Bob and Phil there?
They are.
Hi.
Hey.
They are here.
Hi, Bob.
Hi,
Hi,
Bruce.
Phil.
Hi, Joe.
Hey, James.
Big hugs.
I wanted to say real quick, guys, thank you very much for a gift I feel that I received today and your willingness to share yourselves. Never heard much about Metallica. When my kids play your music, I tell them to turn it down. And today, after watching you, I now want to go buy your album and have very much an appreciation for what you do. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you own the documentary. What do you plan to do with it, and will the rest of the world get a chance to see it?
Yeah, I mean, we plan on sharing it with whoever's interested in sharing it with us. We've really tried to stay as much out of that whole thing as possible, also to kind of feel that there was not almost like a kind of a almost like a conflict of interest or something, that the people paying for the movie were sort of the subjects. We've really let Bruce and Joe really run with this thing, and we really tried to stay the fuck out of the way as much as possible. We ended up in a situation about a year ago, and maybe there's a few people in the room that are going to squirm what I'm about to say, but I think it's important that it is said, is that this was being paid for by a record company, and because that's sort of the nature of how a lot of this stuff works. And they felt that the movie should be used as a promotional tool for the St. Anger record when it came out 9 months ago. And we felt that it should not be used as a promotional tool because there was so much more there, that this was not some making of, or this had potential to just go to a place that maybe in our selfish way, or the way Bruce and Joe looked at it, a place that very few films about rock and roll bands have gone. So we became very protective of the material and of the potential film. And in order for us to go back to what we were talking about before about with Napster and all that, that we felt that the only way we could control it was to basically buy it back from our record company. So we wrote the record company a check, and so then we could at least control it. And we haven't really done much in terms of control stuff since then, other than just try and not interfere in what Joe and Bruce have been doing with the creative direction of the film and so on. But now we plan on seeing if there's anybody out there that's interested in releasing this theatrically. And from the reports that have come through on the cell phone in the last couple of days, it sounds like there are a few people that are hot and bothered. So we look forward to sharing this film with people in movie theaters in America, hopefully, and the rest of the world, hopefully at some point during the summer months. Is kind of our idea. And we really feel strongly that this is the kind of film that should be seen in a theatrical environment. And then there's probably a couple DVDs in there at some point later in the next few years of some of the 1,100 hours of film that's still laying on a floor somewhere.
And it should be shared with as many people as possible because of what you said first. That is a direct result of you seeing the movie and maybe connecting a little more with the next generation and bonding with things instead of separating. And yes, you don't need to blow your ears out, so turn it down a little bit. But I'm glad you shared that with us also, because the generational gap is a lot of what I experienced growing up, and I'm glad that that's connected you two in a little more of a way.
And I really would just like to finish off by saying,
James,
Joe, a couple of 6 months ago, I was having one of my many conversations with Joe, and we were talking about, I was asking him where he was going with the editing of the film, and he said the sort of the mantra that has been, at least for me, the key thing. You know, this is not really a film about Metallica. This is a film about relationships, and the people that are having these relationships happen to live and breathe and play music in a band called Metallica. But we sort of, you know, and Joe and Bruce really felt that this was an awesome chance for people to connect to a bunch of people going through a bunch of struggles in the same way that with Paradise Lost and Brother's Keeper, this was, you know, a film about people, and that there potentially are a bunch of people and movie fans and so on that are interested in seeing films about people. This just happens to be set against the background of rock and roll, so it has a little bit of a different flavor to it.
One of the great documentaries of the 60s is Sympathy for the Devil, the Godard film. I'm wondering, have you guys ever seen that film, and did that have any bearing on your deciding to do something with your careers, much like the Stones?
I've seen the film many, many times. I feel the same way about it as you do. I mean, making films about rock bands that get away from the sort of the glamour and the, you know, all the stuff, you know, try to just, you know, get away from all the usual things that you see, and, you know, the creative process and so on. I mean, there are very few films out there that have done that. Obviously, the film you're talking about is one of them, and I'm humbled and proud if people seem to think that this film is in some way on par with that, or could be a film that can occupy a different niche than all the rest of the self-congratulatory films that people in rock and roll bands seem to make. So, you know, I'd like to think that this sits in a kind of unique place. I'm sure Kirk has seen that film. Have you?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's you know, I think this film sits differently in that we had no idea what was going to unfold, you know, over the course of the movie. I mean, the Stones movie is a bit different in that it's, you know, they're in a sort of like stationary location. I mean, it's basically about, you know, the Stones in the studio, whereas this occupies a lot more.
Hey, Kirk?
Yes.
Unfortunately, we have to cut it short. Thank you so much, guys. This is from Joe and Bruce. We love you guys. Thank you so much. Have a great tour. We love you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.